Hi, thanks for joining me. My name is Sean Williams, and I'm the host today for this year's edition of Perspectives on Politics, a discussion forum set up by the senior seminar students for the political science program at Campbellsville University, where we come together to talk about some of the key issues facing the United States and decisions that are going to have to be made by politicians who are working both in Washington, D.C. and in Frankfort, Kentucky. On today's broadcast, we're going to be talking about mask mandates, and specifically the mask mandate orders that have been put into place by the Governor Andy Beshear, Governor of the state of Kentucky. I'm joined today by my panel list of guests who have spent the last few weeks becoming experts on the topic, and we're here to talk about it today. How is everybody doing?
Pretty good.
Great.
So to get started, I think the first thing we need to do is to help the viewers who are at home, maybe the ones who aren't living in the state of Kentucky, to understand a little bit more about the mask mandate. So if you just want to jump in and talk a little bit about how did the mask mandate get started, and what has its purpose been here in the state?
Well, first of all, our Kentucky Governor, Andy Beshear, closed all essential businesses as of March 18th. And then later in July, he chose to incorporate the mask mandate across the state so that it could probably help slow down the coronavirus cases as well as deaths due to the coronavirus.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was July 10th is when he put the mandate in place. And it seems that at that time it was 30 days. Okay, July 10th. It seemed like he had it in place, or he was planning on keeping it in place for 30 days, and then it's kept going and going until we've reached this point now, and it's still in place, I think.
So I guess we're looking at about 2 months then of effective mandate. Is there any evidence to suggest that the mandate has been effective, or are we wondering whether or not it's been even useful?
Yeah, I can answer that. So what I did was I looked at the data before the mask mandate and then after the mask mandate. And, I looked at cases, but cases can't always be a, correct indication of what is actually happening because, testing availability has gone up, schools have opened, businesses have opened. So there's a lot of outside factors clouding that. But I did look at positivity rate, and just testing the average from the 3 or 4 months before the mask mandate and then the 3 after. Actually the positivity rate isn't that much different, but it's not better. It's actually a little bit worse. But again, there's so many outside factors that it's hard to say definitively that that's the reason, the mask mandate has affected it. But if you look at the numbers so far, taking out every other outside factor, then the mask mandate has not been successful so far with slowing the spread of cases specifically, is what I looked at, was the amount of cases, the number of cases, the positivity rate of those cases. And so far, it hasn't been successful in slowing the spread or stopping new cases from popping up. But, you can't say with definitively that the masks are a factor, whether that's negative or positive for it.
I would like to add to that and saying, although the mandate might not have created a negative rate to the cases, I think that I found research that masks are actually effective in slowing the transmission of the virus. They prevent the spread of viral particles by infected persons and inhalation of viral particles by uninfected persons. So I think that masks are effective. I just don't know if the mask mandate was necessarily effective in keeping down the cases, just because maybe people weren't wearing them when they should have been in the public areas or social distancing in the way they needed to.
Yeah, and I think we also have to ask the question, we look at the science that says that, it keeps particles in and all that, but also, was the mask mandate too late? Was it maybe not as effective now because it should have been in March or February, before we knew how bad it would get? So I think that's another question we have to think about too, is was it too late or was it on time?
I think
Just for
go ahead.
just for clarification, I went ahead and looked up the numbers in my notes, and the average I found positivity rate before was 5.6. That's the average of the 3 or 4 months before the mask mandate, and then the average positivity rate after has been 6.9 thus far. So.
I think you got to look at what the positivity rate could have been. It could have been even higher, right? Like it could be at 8% now if we had a mandated mask. And that's just one way to look at it.
I also looked at some of Jason's numbers and saw that although like the positivity rate is obviously like a little bit higher than it was in the early months, we were also doing a lot less testing in like February, March, and April. And I think that kind of has I think that's why we didn't have the mask mandate in place, because there weren't as many testing. And so it seemed like there weren't as many people like being positive for the coronavirus. And so then we just weren't, we just hadn't incorporated a mask mandate yet, I think is the ultimate issue with it, because we didn't have as much testing. And so no one was like, well, we only have this amount of cases. But then when you look at now versus then, the positivity rate was a lot higher than well, not a lot higher, but higher than it is now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you guys are illustrating is the difficulty in trying to argue counterfactuals, right? Like we know how the world has turned out and what the world looks like. It's often, however, difficult to predict what would have happened had we made different choices in the past. But maybe one way that you can think about doing that is the world more normal now than it was before the mask mandate, right? So I think the logic is that if one of you mentioned that we shut down the state in March, is the state less shut down than it was prior to the mask mandate? Is it more shut down than the mask mandate? Do we have any reason to believe that maybe we've been able to have a greater or swifter return to normalcy because of masks while maintain positivity rate? What has the mask done to life in Kentucky?
I think it let us reopen up businesses, honestly, just because we were allowed to like go in public, but we also had to have that like other factor of being in public and have a mask on when we go to the grocery store, or when we're going to class, we have to have our mask on. And I think that just allows us to like be in public and be around people while also like being safe. So
it was like pretty much a barrier to entry. It's like Carson was saying, the mask mandate gave us an outlet or a way to go back to or return to some kind of normalcy, even though it may not be completely so as like opposed to 2019. But it definitely gave us a way for businesses to open up and for us to start, being in public and public spaces.
Yeah, I think in a time before a vaccine, but after a shutdown, the only way you can actually get any kind of normalcy back is something like a mask mandate.
Another argument that people have made about masks is that it's not as much or only a question of whether or not the masks themselves are effective in terms of the biological effect, but there's also the psychological effect that masks have. That masks are a reminder of how people should change other behaviors, or a reminder of the seriousness of the situation. Do you guys think that masks are really just a form of hygiene theater? Just part of a broader set of efforts to make consumers feel safe so that they're willing to go back to work or go back to purchasing, as opposed to actually providing safety? Is there any evidence to suggest that that's true?
I don't know.
I don't think there's evidence to suggest that it's completely, the hygienic theater type thing. But I do think a big part of, or one of the reasons why they do have the mandate in place is for that sense of safety, right? The current state of the country is already kind of in chaos with everything happening. And so that, feeling of safety when going out to stores or going out to public is good. And I think the bigger question, rather, is it a form of hygienic theater? Is you have to look at the positives versus the negatives of the mask wearing, right? Even if you don't believe fully that it's going to protect you, it's not going to hurt anything either, right? So I think the potential benefits definitely outweigh any negatives that might pop up because, I have heard a little bit of, respiratory issues, people getting sick for wearing them, but that's super rare, I think. And so, just the idea of having to wear one might save someone or might make someone feel better, I think, is in itself, a good enough reason to, wear a mask simply in public. So.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Jason. I think they can go hand in hand. I think, we talked about before how there are things that have proven that, it keeps particles in and it does help, but also it does make people feel safe. So I don't think that you can't have both. I think that you can feel safe while being safe.
Mr. Sherrow, I think
you just look at the business side. Yeah. One thing that people don't realize is one of the important components of opening business is making sure people feel safe enough to come into those businesses. So if people aren't going to come shop, there's no reason to open business anyways. And some of my research showed studies that 70% of people surveyed said that the biggest component that affected whether they would go into public or not is if people were wearing masks or mandated to while they were shopping.
Yeah, on the flip side
so that argument about go ahead, Mr. Beasley.
Okay. So, on the flip side, we're talking about the positives outweighing the negatives, and, some of my peers agree. But I do think, at the very extreme, it is a bit dangerous, this sense of hope, right? Because I think there is a sense of, a false sense of hope, right? That, if you're wearing a mask, you're not going to get it and you're free to go out in public and do whatever. And so I think that is kind of a dangerous line that we could get close to if people think that, they're invincible with a mask and that they can do whatever they want. And they don't have to do the distancing and the other things. So I do think it can become dangerous as a form of theater, like the question was asking. We're not there yet, but I think it can if people think or start thinking they're invincible simply because they're wearing a face covering or mask. So.
I wanted to come back to an argument or a statement that Mr. Beasley had made earlier. You had suggested that wearing a mask doesn't harm anyone, although you just kind of followed up and said that maybe by creating this false security, you get large, it might. Something that does harm people, it seems a growing level of resistance to the mask mandate, not only here in Canada, but also in other parts of the country. If masks are so painless, and if masks seem to have so many positive effects, at the very least allowing people to get back to something more like a normal life, why do you guys feel like there's been such opposition among some facets of society to wearing masks in public spaces?
I think people feel that it's a restriction of their own personal freedoms. I mean, it's a question of the culture, and I think specifically in the United States, people feel, well, it's my body. I have the right to go out in public if I want to mingle without the public. And then if I get sick, so be it. But I shouldn't be enforced to have to wear a mask wherever I go. Again, it goes back to my body. I can do what I want. But yeah, I feel like that's part of the resistance to it is people feel like it's like almost, I've seen this before. People say it's a muzzle. They feel like they just can't be free with having to wear the mask all the time.
Well, I think Hunter's right, but also that, in America, we're just used to this, this so much comfort in our lives, right? We do live a comfortable life in this country compared to a lot of places. So we're just used to that. And then when something disrupts that, because a mask can be uncomfortable a lot of times, that just creates the resistance. You know, I don't know if a personal freedom with mask, you know, it's in whether it is or not, I'm not sure, but I don't think that's the hill to die on. I think there's, you know, other issues with personal freedoms and rights that come up with the coronavirus, and mask really isn't one because, you know, it is just such a simple thing. And, you know, I think Hunter has a point that, you know, it can be, you know, telling someone what to do with their body as compared to others, but it's definitely not the hill to die on when it comes to personal freedoms.
You know, it's interesting, and I understand what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, right? The question about personal freedom in the United States is an issue. Certainly personal freedoms are important to us, maybe more so than in other cultures, and particularly important in rural areas. But the argument that I hear a lot living in Kentucky is that Americans need to be more selfless than selfish, that we need to support those people in our society who make sacrifices for others. Jason, you keep mentioning this is not the hill to die on. Do you feel that that's true just because the times demand it? Or do you feel, and this is open to anybody, but do you feel that it's true because we have a greater call to be more selfless or self-sacrificial? There's some kind of a moral requirement that we worry about other people's health more than we do necessarily our own comfort. What do you think is going on there?
Yeah, so you know, the American way of government, I think, is a bit selfish. I mean, it really is how it's set up. Whether you look at our economic system or whether you look at the Bill of Rights. And we say selfish as a negative term, but I'm not necessarily using it here. But I mean, it really is. So that's what we're used to. But the good thing and what allows us to have that is the sense of morality and helping your fellow man. And so instead of leaving it to, in most cases, instead of leaving it to the government to tell us how to take care of our neighbors, you know, we were trusted as citizens of the United States to help the fellow man without having to be told to do so. And I think that's why a lot of people do wear the mask, right? Whether they believe it or not, they think if it will help their fellow man, you know, their elderly neighbor or their, you know, grandma or, you know, their child that they live with. I think that's one reason why they do that. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, it's not the hill to die on, but I think it's great that we have that sense of helping the fellow man. And we don't always have to be told what to do, but that's what's causing the resistance because we usually don't have to have that, you know, force that tells us what to do.
I also think that I looked at a source that talked about faux calls like panopticon and how we have this sense of like social control and like social obedience to like help people. And like during the plague, the Black Plague, people had like a sense of social control to like stay away from people who weren't sick if you were sick or and so I think that that's kind of like reoccurring now, and like we have a social obedience to follow the mask mandate and to therefore like slow the spread and transmission. I think that we also have people can call and like kind of tell on people if they're not wearing their masks or if they're not following social distancing on like businesses or even individuals specifically. And so I think that when we have this social control, social obedience, like during the pandemic, I think that kind of like plays into our empathy aspect. And if people aren't doing that, like what's their level of empathy and like, do they care about other people? So.
And I think going back to Jason saying that the culture in the U.S. is more based on we kind of have the proactiveness to help the fellow man, right? I feel like people feel like that was like taken away from them almost. It was like, so the government, the federal government or the state governments themselves put this in place, and it kind of took the voice away from, let's say, like local businesses. And I've seen this personally, some will put no mask required, or some will say, you know, you're required to wear a mask. You could almost say it could be left up to a business or a place of gathering. You could leave it up to them, but you're just taking that whole option away. And I think people could feel a little upset about that option was taken from.
When you talk about the question of options, that's actually a really good one. The idea that I should get to make choices for myself, or maybe even the argument that the mask mandate may be more necessary in some situations than others, and I get to choose which situations I want to be in. To follow up on that, one of the things that I've heard a lot, especially living in rural Kentucky, are arguments that maybe mask mandates are important in urban areas like Jefferson County, where the threat of COVID spread is greater because of higher population densities. But the mask mandate may be less necessary in Marion County, where the threat of spread is not as important. Do you guys feel that the mask mandate should be applied universally across the state because the state is a community and we're in this together? Or do you think it would be appropriate to allow mask mandates to be handled at the county level or maybe at the city level so that we could target more narrowly towards where the threat for COVID is the greatest?
Yeah, so I think
you want to take that?
Yeah, I think that's a question that a lot of people have started to ask. Some people are getting tired of the mask mandate, and they're like, I live in a small town. Like, I don't live in Louisville or Lexington, so why should I have to continue this? And, I think that's hard because I am, I'm from a small town, and, to get almost anything, you have to go to Bowling Green, you have to go, to Louisville, and it can be easily brought back. And so, yes, you would have to wear a mask there, but does that necessarily mean that you're completely safe? And also looking at, the number statistics, Campbellsville, for instance, last week was in the red zone. And while we are a larger population town and we have a university, we're definitely not as large as Lexington or Louisville. And so I think that's a lot of people here asking that question, should our county or city still be under a mask mandate? But even though our numbers aren't, as high, the positivity rate is still, fluctuating quite a bit.
To play off of that, I think that although statistically numbers are a little bit lower in rural areas, I think that the mortality and fatality rate play a role in that. And I think that we have older structures in rural areas that kind of play, and older populations kind of that play into the role of the death rate and the mortality rates in rural areas. And I think that if we have countywide versus statewide, I think that our cases will go up, and I think the death rate will too, because I think it's way easier to monitor a statewide mask mandate than, so say Taylor County doesn't have a mask mandate, but then Marion County does. So Marion County people can come here and they wear their mask, but Taylor County people don't have to wear their mask, and then they go there, and it's where's the divide and the social control? I mean, I think some people would follow it, but I think that it would just create kind of chaos, not necessarily that we can see, but I think that the cases would go up, and I think it is easier to make people feel safer if there's statewide versus countywide.
I think too that if it went countywide, you would see a majority of the counties get rid of it, whereas it would mainly be rural areas like Lexington and Louisville keeping it. And I mean, that's kind of the question, but the issue with that is then you have more of the state without a mask mandate than with one. And it's why do you even have one if majority of your citizens are not going to have to do it?
And I think something that Ms. Kavala mentioned, and maybe a follow-up to what you were
throughout, then.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Hunter, or Mr. Wilson.
I was just agreeing with Jordan saying, it is a matter, I think, of consistency. If we do it by county, it's not very consistent throughout the state, and then you have people coming from others, and it's like I would almost compare it to, we have to social distance, right, and wear a mask when we're around other people, when we sit down, and we take it off. You know what I mean? It might just make it null the whole point of the mask mandate in the first place.
Makes it less legitimate too, I think.
I had earlier in the summer, I had traveled to Texas at about a week after they implemented their mask mandate. And their implementation was based upon the level of positivity and the number of cases in your particular county. So the net effect was you would have a county that had a high rate and had to have a mask mandate. But then people who lived in that county would then travel to nearby neighboring counties where the rate was low enough that masks weren't necessary. And then the following week, those counties started to see spikes in number of cases or increases a couple of weeks later in number of deaths, precisely because people were trying to avoid the mask mandate. So based upon what you're arguing, do you think that Kentucky would support limits on mobility, where we could make an argument that if your county doesn't have a mask mandate, then residents of a neighboring county with a mandate are just simply not allowed to cross county lines as a way of controlling the spread? So effectively, you can have no masks if you want them, but the net result of that is you're also going to have no one coming into your county to do business. Would Kentuckians react favorably to that, or do you think that'd be a no-go?
Well, so would the counties without the mask mandate also not be able to go to other counties? Because I think that would be, I mean, that kind of goes back to what Lydia was saying, and that like she has to go to like a bigger city like Bowling Green. So if her county didn't have a mask mandate, would she not be able to go like to get like necessities, you know? So I think we can't really do that. And I think it's not really applicable in our state, because we have a lot of rural areas that you have to go like from county to county as a way to get like things you need.
Right. And if we were talking earlier about people just kind of complaining about their personal rights being violated, and if they're going to do that with just putting something over their face, imagine if they're not even allowed to go to the next county for the foreseeable future. I just think it'd be an unrealistic way of keeping this under control compared to masks.
No, yeah.
When you look at rural. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with Jordan completely that would not go over well at all. It would go over much worse than the mask mandate. Even when Bashir issued the travel ban to other states earlier, I think it was to Tennessee and some of those other states that didn't have as aggressive mandates as us. He got sued. He got sued in court for that. And so interstate travel, banning that or limiting that would not go over well. And I'm sure he would get sued again very quickly with a lot more angry people because, you know, that is one of the things about the United States is that we can travel to state, but within our state even more so. And so, no, it would not go over well. And it probably would affect a lot of people, including, you know, local communities and their, you know, their governments and commerce. So it wouldn't, I think it would do more harm than good.
Yeah, and going back to rural counties, if you just look statistically, Republicans live in rural areas or more conservative populations. And if you just look and see just generally how they feel about the mask mandate itself as it stands, if you were to go and tell them they can't even travel to the next county unless there is a mask mandate, then, I mean, it's just going to make them more upset, I guess you could say, with the current affairs of things.
Along the same lines as this debate over highly populated regions versus less populated regions, it seems like Kentucky has also been fiercely divided over whether or not public schools should reopen. Now, while the question of school opening is a little bit outside of our boundaries, part of that debate is whether or not students in public schools should be required to wear masks, or if we should just accept the fact that getting an 8-year-old to wear a mask all day is really not something that teachers are capable of. Do you guys feel in general, I guess a couple of different questions, do you feel in general that having public schools open poses a threat to the communities that they're in, since most evidence suggests that the children will be fine who attend them? And do you think that a mask mandate in the public schools is something that would be useful? Ms. Manley?
Yeah, so when it comes to the mask, just like I did a lot of research on public schools, and I think it's pretty obvious that kids want to go back to school. And while at first it seemed like parents and teachers and really everybody was concerned with whether or not kids would, follow the mask rules, would follow the social distancing rules. But there's actually been some schools that, high schools, where there wasn't a mask mandate and the students, put out like, hey, like, let's try to get a mask mandate for our school so we can stay in school. And, everybody's pretty willing to wear a mask. So I think, like concluding that about the mask that, kids want to be in school, and I think they'll follow the rules, to be able to do that.
Yeah, I want to speak to the second point of the question. The idea, are schools a threat to the communities or vice versa? And I think the answer is pretty clear that it's the communities to the schools, right? Because we've seen, even though it could be increasing, the amount of children getting COVID is much less than people who are older. And I think we can look right to our backyard, right? In Greensburg, or Greene County, right beside us, they were, I think, one of the first to go back to school here in Kentucky. And the model they used was based on community cases, not school cases. And so once there was such a threshold of cases in the communities, then they shut down schools. And so I think that's really a model that we should follow when looking, is it community versus school, which poses a threat to the other. And so, and I definitely think the answer is pretty clear that it's the communities to the schools because of the, older cases and the model we've seen used in the past.
Do you think that the schools opening back up didn't contribute to maybe the community getting higher cases?
I mean, it definitely could have, but I don't think, from what I've read, in the school of actually, Greensburg County schools, there wasn't any new cases from students. I don't think there was even any from teachers, but if there were one, it was teachers and not the students. So I definitely think that's a model that will continue as we see more schools open up. Not to say students are exempt from getting it, obviously, but I think the risk of the communities getting it and bringing it to the schools, such as when they go home at night, or the, faculty that work in the school, I think that's the real threat compared to students versus community.
I think another way to look at it too is, are students receiving an adequate education through Zoom or online classes? I mean, not every child has access to internet or any form of Wi-Fi, and live in rural areas maybe. I think it's just a matter of, we just need to see how this is going to affect kids, in the long run. I don't know how you can expect a child to sit in front of a computer for 6 to 8 hours. So, I mean, the same with the mask. How can you expect them to wear a mask all day, or how can you expect them to sit down all day? It's just, that's just another way to look at it.
So we're running out of time, but I do want to ask one final question. I'm going to give all the panelists a chance to answer it from their own perspectives. It sounds like that on balance, the argument is that mask mandates are effective, at least if they're effective if people are willing to follow them. But one question that we have to wrestle with is, at what point do we stop using a mask mandate? At some point, is it when COVID declines, or do we think of a mask mandate as being something that we can use again in the future when we have other epidemics or pandemics, or just when we have a bad flu season? What do you guys think? When does the mask mandate come to an end? Mr. Sherrill, let's start with you.
I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, yeah, you can look at it from cases declining, although I don't think that's going to be the thing that ends it. I would say probably a successful vaccine will be the occurrence that happens before the mandate is repealed. But I think that we probably will see these in the future again, with whether it be other viruses or just people continuing to wear one in public for the foreseeable future, whether they have to or not. But yeah, overall, I think it'll at least be a few more months before we see anything about the mandate going away.
I have to agree with Jordan on that one. I think it's a matter of time, I'd say, for the vaccine to come out and be available to the public. Or, I mean, this is more of like a pessimist approach here, but I mean, I'd say maybe until the focus changes. I mean, we see that, I mean, specifically in Kentucky, social unrest, for various different reasons. I think maybe whenever the attention changes from a virus to something more, I'd say, close to home, people may not even worry about it at that point. So I'd say either vaccine or just maybe when the focus changes.
Yeah, so I think it'll be really interesting to see just how normalized masks.
Ms. Manley, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think it'll be just really interesting to see like how normalized masks are after like the pandemic ends, because whenever it does end, because we see other countries have in some ways like normalized masks, but I think especially more like elderly people when they go out, if it's flu season, if there's some other like smaller virus kind of going around the community, I think that we will see a lot more masks here and there, and that people, it will be more socially acceptable as well. But I have to agree with Jason and Hunter, or Jordan and Hunter, when they talk about there being a vaccine. I think that's what a lot of the leaders have said. I think that's what a lot of people have said, that this really can't end until the vaccine is found.
Yeah. So, it's a very difficult question to answer, because the end result to this pandemic seems to be constantly changing, right? First, it was, let's slow the spread. Then it was flatten the curve. And now it's wait till we have a vaccine, but a lot of people might not take the vaccine and it might be not safe. So, like, there's really no end in sight to this. And I think you can say the same thing for a mask mandate. It's hard to tell what the end result.
What do you think?
That threw me off. It's just, did you hear the first part? I guess so. It's just hard to say because the end result is so, flawed. But I think, something has to happen to end, or to at least tell us what the goal of ending is, because, something we kind of touched on was the unrest about it and the resistance to mask wearing. And I think it's even more prevalent here in Kentucky because we have a Democratic governor and we're a red state. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. And the fact that, the CDC recommended at first we shouldn't have a mask mandate, and then they said we did. And, just the idea that, the economic status of Kentucky has long been, neglected in a sense, you could say. And so I think here in Kentucky, it's more vital than ever that we get some type of answer about how it's going to end, or what's going to happen, or how long we're going to have to deal with this. And so, I don't think anyone knows, because, information is changing every day. Experts learn something new every day. And it's just, I'm glad we have that to be able to look up, but it's hard to see an end. So.
I kind of playing off of what everyone else said. I mean, I think that the mask mandate is going to continue for, again, the foreseeable future. I mean, I don't even know if when we got a vaccine, if that would create like, if that would like take away the mask mandate, because I don't know if people are going to want to take the vaccine as soon as it comes out. And so if people aren't taking it, then like, what do we do then? And then also, I think masks should be worn like when people are sick, like in the future. I think like if someone catches the flu, like, or just feels sick in general, I think that wearing a mask is like beneficial to like the health of everyone, like people who are in contact with that person, as well as the person who's sick in general. So.
Yeah, so I think we're all kind of agreeing that the future is going to kind of show how things are going to go from now on, and in the coming months, we'll probably learn more about the future of the mandate for sure.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's it's just another thing on the plate of this year, and we're unsure how it's going to end. So we'll see. So yeah, guys, I think that's all we have. Thanks to everyone listening, on the computer or live. We hope you appreciated the takes we have and the research we've done, and that you can use this to, make your decision more wisely, or, just decide the position you're going to take on this coronavirus, and hopefully return to a little bit of normalcy in this time. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.